We begin this hour with a human touchstone to the war in Iran. The body of Sergeant Ashley Pruitt carried home to her family in Kentucky. What you are watching right now is a ceremony the military calls a dignified transfer. Hands over hearts, people saluting, and thus ends the story of someone who signed up to serve our nation. Sergeant Pruitt, one of 6 crew members to lose their lives last month in a plane crash in Iraq during Operation Epic Fury. We're watching that this hour, while also at the same time, peace talks about to begin between the United States and Iran. But now a ceasefire deal appears to be paper thin. So Iran this hour claims Israel and the United States have violated the fragile ceasefire agreement after Israel launched a massive wave of airstrikes in Lebanon. Lebanon's health ministry says this attack killed more than 200 people. Residential areas of Beirut hit hard. In fact, at this hour, people are missing under the rubble. You can see the heavy equipment going in, trying to find them. Lebanese officials are declaring a national day of mourning in the wake of the attacks. Iran's deputy foreign minister told our partners at BBC News the U.S. must choose between war and a ceasefire.
It was a grave violation, intentional grave violation of the ceasefire. You cannot have a cake and eat it at the same time. That was the message that Iran sent quite clearly, crystal clearly to Washington and to the Oval Office last night. And our foreign minister also said that you cannot ask for a ceasefire and then accept terms and conditions, accept the areas that ceasefire is applied to, and name Lebanon, exactly Lebanon in that, and then your ally just start a massacre.
Once again, the voice of Iran's foreign minister there. So let's contrast that with what Vice President J.D. Vance has to say ahead of his meetings in Pakistan, trying to solidify a deal.
I think the Iranians thought that the ceasefire included Lebanon, and it just didn't. We never made that promise. We never indicated that was going to be the case. What we said is that the ceasefire would be focused on Iran, and the ceasefire would be focused on America's allies, both Israel and the Gulf Arab states.
All right, so let's add another piece to the story. This just in. Following those much criticized Israeli strikes in Lebanon, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has directed his cabinet to open negotiations with Lebanon. In fact, one of the top talking points will be disarming the Iran-backed militant group Hezbollah. And minutes ago, the Associated Press reported those talks between Israel and Lebanon are expected to start next week. We now know where they will happen. In Washington, D.C., that's according to multiple sources. Well, people in Tel Aviv live under constant threat, seemingly every hour. CBS News senior foreign correspondent Elizabeth Palmer is there with a reality check for the entire region. Watch.
Well, first, the good news. There were no missiles in the air over Tel Aviv last night, and my contacts in Iran also tell me they had their first peaceful sleep in weeks with no U.S. or Israeli attacks. So millions of people in this region are breathing great sighs of relief, but not in Lebanon or the north of Israel. The Iranian-backed militia Hezbollah fired rockets into northern Israel this morning. That in retaliation for Israel's ferocious attack on Hezbollah yesterday, which killed 254 people, some in the countryside and some in the capital, Beirut. Last night, Iran warned that the strikes might also kill the ceasefire, but it didn't pull out right away. It said to give the U.S. a chance to intervene and calm things down. In Iran, thousands of the regime's supporters are in the streets today to mark the 40th day after the death of the supreme leader who was killed at the start of the war. Even Iran's president, Masoud Pezeshkian, was in the crowd, which is very sympathetic to Hezbollah and, frankly, lukewarm on the idea of sitting down at the negotiating table with the United States in Pakistan this weekend. Right now, it looks as if those talks are in jeopardy. Iran's deputy foreign minister told British television that Iran is only going to show up for the negotiations if Israel stops attacking Hezbollah, and Israel has said the attacks are going to go on. Back to you.
Elizabeth Palmer, thank you so much. So let's go to the White House and CBS News correspondent Natalie Brand. Natalie, good to see you. So what's the White House saying about where we stand this hour?
Well, we're waiting for new word regarding these reports about direct negotiations between Israel and Lebanon. Of course, that was a dispute that we've been tracking over the past 24 hours, with the U.S. saying that Lebanon was not part of the initial ceasefire. Iran, of course, disputing that. The White House has acknowledged that this is a fragile truce, but they are trying to downplay concerns that it will not hold. The vice president, we heard from him yesterday as he left Hungary, and he said ceasefires are always messy, to expect some choppiness. We know the administration is also keeping a close eye today on the Strait of Hormuz because due to the dispute over Lebanon, there's reports that Iran has been restricting traffic through that key waterway. Economic advisor Kevin Hassett, talking to Fox Business earlier, said that they expect more ships to be able to pass through, but they'll wait to see if that's true or not. So, there is some apprehension. The president also stating on social media quite clearly that U.S. aircraft, ships, and military personnel will stay in and around Iran until a final agreement is reached, emphasizing on social media that that means no nuclear weapons and that the Strait of Hormuz will be open and safe. Reed.
Well, all of those developments seem to really ramp up the tension in this story as Vice President J.D. Vance gets ready to go to Pakistan and have those meetings. Is there any development here that could make those talks go away?
I mean, I guess all eyes are on whether the ceasefire does in fact hold. But, right now, we heard from the vice president yesterday expressing some optimism and saying that, he hopes that Iran shows up to the bargaining table seriously, that fundamentally they have to take the next step here, or else the president has options to go back to the war. We know that if these negotiations do in fact move forward, which we are expecting them to at this point, a key issue is going to be uranium enrichment. That was reiterated by the press secretary, saying that that remains a red line for President Trump. Again, a key stated goal of this entire conflict and operation was to make sure that Iran cannot have nuclear weapons. And we were hearing from Iranian officials just yesterday arguing, that they retain the right to enrich. So we know that is going to be a key issue in the days and weeks to come, this 2-week ceasefire, when these negotiations are supposed to yield, hopefully, a lasting peace.
Right. And we know the president has expressed disappointment with our allies that they haven't done more to go and, as he puts it, claim the Strait of Hormuz. The president has really had some harsh words for our NATO allies, especially going into this meeting with Secretary General of NATO, Mr. Rutte. What's the state of our alliances with NATO as of today?
Well, that meeting here at the White House did remain closed, so we didn't hear from the president about it, but we did get some additional insight from the NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte himself. He spoke a short time ago at the Reagan Institute, not far from here, and he said that this was a frank conversation with President Trump, that the president expressed his disappointment that he felt allies were not there for them when he asked them to do more to secure the Strait of Hormuz. But Rutte essentially argued that, European allies have done what the president has asked. We know that, European allies led by UK, this coalition of countries, have said that they would think through options and ways to help secure the strait once the fighting ended. Their argument was always, this is not our war, but we will come up with some solutions for once combat ended. So Rutte essentially saying the ceasefire is still in the early stages. They have to wait for it to get a little farther in before they deploy resources, but that could include mine technology, radar, other things to help secure it. And he was also asked about these reports that the president is considering potentially moving U.S. forces out of some NATO countries that he viewed as unhelpful during the war. And Rutte said in response to that, the U.S. wants to pivot toward the Indo-Pacific in the future, saying Europe needs to step up and contribute more to NATO. But in arguing for this key military alliance, he said, for the U.S. to stay safe, you need to secure Europe and Arctic. Reed.
CBS News 24/7, the place to go for all the latest breaking news details on the war with Iran. Natalie Brand, thank you so much for keeping us current. Joining us now is CBS News Congressional correspondent Caitlin Huey-Burns in Washington. So, Caitlin, now let's go from the White House to where you are with your view of what lawmakers are having to say. They want Congress to reassert their powers to the executive branch, the legislative branch, the power to declare war. What are you hearing on that front?
Well, Reed, this is a push by Democrats to exert some kind of authority or reclaim the authority that they are given under the Constitution to declare war. But that really isn't going anywhere, Reed. Just a couple of hours ago, House Democrats tried to force this on to the House floor. That was rejected by Republicans. Now, the Senate's going to try to take this up next week, and we'll see what happens there. But the bigger story is that Democrats are saying, look, not only is this potential deal, this short-term deal, short-term and fragile in their words. But just a couple of days ago, the president was talking about wiping out an entire civilization. So Democrats are trying to argue that they want to exert some authority here, given the president's rhetoric and moves and the nature of this ceasefire. Republicans, by and large, have been supportive of the president's move on Iran since the beginning. They have been standing by him. There hasn't been a fracture really within the party, but they are feeling the pressure, Reed. They're looking at polling that's showing that they are in trouble heading into the midterm elections. They are also hearing from constituents about high gas prices in addition to higher prices on everything else. So there is this pressure that is facing them back home, potentially ahead of the midterms especially. And there is a sense, and I've been talking to lots of lawmakers over the past couple of months since this began, and there has been this very vested interest in wrapping this up. So the Democrats' position was they could force Republicans on a vote here, but it doesn't seem, at least at this point, that there are enough Republicans that want to go this route either.